forebears.
Mm-hmm.
The one that Banana only seems interested in is Baron Nicholas Rauschenberg von Schartenberg.
Mm-hmm.
And she really doesn't pay any attention to any of the others.
Mm-hmm.
But Johann von Teal, who came to this country in 1848 from Freiburg in Germany, first came to the Bowery in Manhattan, and he had a farm on Manhattan Island. Can you imagine? Then he moved to the Albany area, and that's where he got married to Ottila Renck, and I think she might have come from Freiburg too. And he got married in the Holy Trinity Church there and changed his name from Johann von Teal to John Teal. That was my father's grandfather. Right.
It doesn't say where in Manhattan his farm was.
No, but oh wow.
That is pretty. It must have been a different city then.
Oh yeah,
Central Park.
1848. Yeah, right. And he had brothers. Well, Block Island Restaurant. Okay, well. Okay. So, and then I have things about Daddy that I want to say again. And you see, this is the problem, having all these things mixed up here. Partially my recollections, partially talking to Banana, then Banana getting distracted and so forth. So I read you the thing about Uncle Frank. I thought that was really, I mean, Mother never talked about any of that, or if she did, I didn't listen, which could be also the case. Okay, what was I going to say? Oh, okay, so Daddy had this very successful engineering firm. I think it was called an engineering firm, but it was Fox Brothers, and he was, according to that thing I read before, I guess the president and the director of it. And anyway, he was the one who was dealing with the King of Spain and Ataturk and so forth. And
it was engineering for railroads.
Well, he built the Madrid airport and the dockyards all along the Sea of Marmara in Turkey.
Wow.
And what other things, I don't know. Those are just the ones that seem to be mentioned. He was obviously very successful, and he and Mother must have lived in New York in the very beginning when they were married. Then they moved to Spring Lake in New Jersey, and he commuted into New York City. And then I guess he was asked to go out to Chicago to put the candy Mars bars, whatever it was, back together again. And then
that sounds like a big switch from.
well,
so
he
must
also
have been,
done. He did many things. I mean, I read
so
about.
Was he more in the financial part of the business?
It must have been, yeah. And then in that Who's Who thing, it mentioned too of the Lehigh Valley Railroad, which was a very big railroad, and then another railroad. I mean, so he had quite broad experience. He was brilliant mathematically. He never was able to help me a bit. I was such a dolt in math because I would present him with a problem and he would give me the answer. And that wasn't acceptable to the teachers. They wanted to know how I had gotten there. So he never was able to help me at all, but he really had a brilliant mind for figures and math and stuff like that. And I don't think it was because of what he'd been trained to do. I think it was because he didn't, he didn't go through college. I know that at one point in those letters, he was saying to Mother that he was thinking of going to law school. But by that time, he was already, he was a pretty well-known, respected person. That was when he had organized this mammoth thing in New York,
Right.
and the vice president came with him, and they, you know, I mean, it was really
And that was to get money for
the Red Cross.
For the Red Cross, okay.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Well, we were at war with
Right,
Germany,
Yeah.
and anyway, so. But you see, I never asked about all those things, and some of these details I picked up from the Who's Who. This big fat volume that was down at Banana's house. And you didn't get into Who's Who unless you were a fairly distinguished person in this country. Anyway, so they obviously were very prosperous. And so they moved from New Jersey to Chicago, and then back to, and then Banana was born in Chicago, and then I don't know if they lived in New York at all, but then they bought a house in Greenwich, or decided to move to Greenwich. At that time, and actually all the time I was growing up, Greenwich, Connecticut was known as the richest town in the United States, and what it was all the industrialists, the people who made all the things that America used, all the businesses were located in New York, and to bring up their families and to escape New York taxes, all the CEOs, they weren't even called CEOs in those days, they were called the president and you know, that kind of thing, of the companies moved to Greenwich. And that's why it got its reputation. And they built these incredible mansions, you know, imitating medieval castles. There were 2 medieval castles in Greenwich, Connecticut, and French chateaus like the one that we stayed in, you know, imitations of Mount Vernon, George Washington's. But I mean, it was just, everybody was sort of buying heritage by building these things, but really, really very, very rich people.
And when your dad bought the house that you were living in, how old were you then?
Well, first they lived on Mar Avenue, and I think they had bought the house. It was known as the Italian, among the tradespeople, I guess, as the Italian Villa. And it was in Bellhaven, which was the most exclusive part of the whole town of Greenwich. And we had a private police force. I mean, nowadays you'd call it a gated community, but Tom and Bill, Bill was skinny and Tom was fat, and they wore police uniforms, and they had a little police booth, and they stopped you as you were driving in and asked you where you were going, and if they weren't too sure, they would call up and say, "Are you expecting so and so?" And they knew the delivery people and everything. But it was. I never thought of it until recent years, but it was what we now call a gated community. And there were some places where there were chains across the road, so nobody, outsiders couldn't go in. You had to go by the police booth in order to get in. Anyway, and that was, so they bought this very, very beautiful house. Simple, but very, very beautiful. It was sort of set down on Otter Rock Drive, and it was set down from the road, and I remember there was a huge apple tree, a great big gorgeous apple tree, sort of halfway between the wall that separated it from the road and the house, and it was mammoth. It was not as big as the oak down there, but it was that kind of a big ancient tree. And this was a lovely, lovely white stucco house. Very classic and very simple. Downstairs was a huge, long living room, and then a big entry hall with the stairs going up and up, and then a dining room and a living room of equal size, but very large. And they were beautifully furnished, very, very simply, not overcrowded, not filled with a lot of stuff. But my mother had picked out really elegant